The congressional hearing room fell silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett approached the microphone. What was supposed to be a routine oversight committee hearing on election integrity suddenly became the most explosive political confrontation of the year when former presidential advisor Kellyanne Conway, testifying as an expert witness, began aggressively interrupting Crockett's questioning. The C-SPAN cameras captured it all in stunning clarity. Conway cutting off Crockett's first question, then her second, then a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth time in rapid succession. Each interruption grew more dismissive than the last, with Conway's signature smirk growing wider as committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm not finished with my question." "Ms. Conway," Crockett said firmly after the sixth interruption, her patience visibly wearing thin. Conway leaned forward into her microphone. "I think we all know where this line of questioning is going. Congresswoman." What happened next left everyone in the hearing room completely speechless. Crockett's seventh response, delivered with ice-cold precision, caused Conway's face to freeze in shock. For the first time in her political career, the woman known as the Queen of Spin was rendered completely silent, mouth agape, as committee members and spectators audibly gasped. The tension in the room was palpable, as journalists frantically scribbled notes and congressional staffers exchanged wide-eyed glances. No one had ever seen Conway, famous for her unflappable media appearances, caught so completely off guard. What could Crockett possibly have said to silence Washington's most formidable spin doctor? Even veteran political reporters who had covered hundreds of hearings sensed something extraordinary was unfolding. The usual background murmur of the hearing room had given way to complete silence, broken only by the sound of camera shutters as photographers captured Conway's stunned expression. One seasoned committee staffer later told reporters that in 15 years working on Capitol Hill, he had never witnessed such a dramatic reversal in a hearing. Conway walked in like she owned the room, and 7 minutes later, her entire career was in freefall. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible moments of political accountability. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these game-changing confrontations as they happen. Our channel brings you the raw, unfiltered moments when political power players face real questions and can't hide behind talking points. Whether you're a political junkie or just someone who appreciates seeing powerful figures held to account, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Kellyanne Conway, 57, had built her reputation as one of Washington's most formidable political strategists. As the first woman to successfully run a presidential campaign, Conway transformed herself from respected pollster to household name during the Trump administration, where she served as senior counselor to the president. Her combative media style, quick deflections, and ability to spin even the most damaging stories earned her both admirers and critics. Conway's legendary appearances on news programs made her famous for never conceding a point, interrupting hosts and redirecting conversations away from uncomfortable topics. Her term alternative facts became shorthand for the administration's approach to information management. Since leaving the White House, Conway had established herself as a political commentator and consultant who commanded high-speaking fees and maintained significant influence among conservative circles. What made Conway particularly dangerous in congressional hearings was her mastery of procedural tactics. She knew exactly how far she could push the boundaries of decorum without technically breaking rules, frustrating Democratic questioners who struggled to pin her down on specific answers. Before today's hearing, Conway had publicly dismissed the investigation as another partisan fishing expedition and predicted that no one will remember this committee's work a month from now. Her confidence walking into the hearing room was evident. She greeted Republican members warmly, barely acknowledging the Democrats on the dais. This was a familiar environment for Conway, who had navigated countless high-pressure situations throughout her career. Conway had prepared extensively for this appearance, participating in several mock hearings with a team of lawyers who had studied previous committee questioning styles. According to sources familiar with her preparation, she had developed specific deflection strategies for each committee member based on their past performance. For Crockett, the plan was simple. Interrupt early and often to throw her off rhythm, then characterize her questions as partisan attacks to delegitimize the entire line of inquiry. This approach had worked effectively against other Democratic questioners in the past. Facing her was Representative Jasmine Crockett, 43, a rising star in progressive politics. Before entering Congress, Crockett had built an impressive career as a civil rights attorney in Texas, representing clients in voting rights and police misconduct cases. Her legal background gave her a precision in questioning that distinguished her from many of her congressional colleagues. What made Crockett particularly effective was her courtroom experience. Unlike many politicians who relied on staffers to prepare their questions, Crockett had spent years directly examining hostile witnesses. She knew how to establish a line of questioning that built toward a revealing conclusion rather than settling for isolated gotcha moments. Unlike many of her colleagues who sought viral moments by expressing outrage, Crockett was known for her methodical approach. Her staff often described her preparation process as building a trap, laying groundwork question by question until a witness had nowhere to retreat. This morning, she had arrived at the hearing room 3 hours early, reviewing documents with her staff and making final adjustments to her questioning strategy. What few people knew was that Crockett had spent the previous weekend reviewing every public hearing appearance Conway had made over the past decade. She had studied Conway's deflection patterns, interruption triggers, and body language cues that signaled when she was particularly uncomfortable with a line of questioning. Crockett had even created a detailed matrix of Conway's favorite deflection phrases and practiced responses that would neutralize each one. The stakes of this confrontation extended far beyond personal rivalry. The committee was investigating potential coordination between political campaigns and social media operations that spread election misinformation. Conway had been called to testify about her knowledge of these operations, as several former colleagues had implicated her in directing sophisticated disinformation strategies. For Conway, this hearing represented a threat to both her reputation and future business prospects. Being directly linked to coordinated disinformation campaigns could damage her credibility with mainstream corporate clients. For Crockett, this was about establishing accountability for actions that had undermined democratic institutions and public trust. The committee room was packed with journalists and spectators who sensed the potential for a memorable confrontation. Conway's reputation for verbal jiu-jitsu against Democrats was well established, and few expected her to face any significant challenge from the committee. Crockett, however, had spent weeks preparing for this moment, combing through thousands of pages of documents, emails, and testimony from previous witnesses. The tension between them reflected America's larger political divide. Conway, embodying a political philosophy where winning justified almost any tactic, and Crockett representing a vision of politics still bound by norms of truth and accountability. What neither woman anticipated was how dramatically this confrontation would reshape both of their political futures. The tension had been building since Conway entered the hearing room 20 minutes late, offering a perfunctory apology while arranging her papers with unhurried precision. Several Republican committee members had already used their questioning time to help Conway frame her role as minimal and advisory rather than operational, establishing a narrative of distance from the controversial social media campaigns. When Democratic questioning began, Conway employed her trademark strategy of lengthy, meandering answers that consumed questioners' limited time. The committee chair had already admonished her twice to provide direct responses when Crockett's turn arrived. The room shifted attention to Crockett, who sat perfectly composed at the far end of the dais. Unlike some members who had shown visible frustration with Conway's evasions, Crockett appeared completely unfazed, even slightly amused, as she organized her notes and adjusted her microphone. "Good morning, Ms. Conway," she began, her tone cordial but businesslike. "Thank you for appearing today." Conway nodded slightly, her expression neutral but watchful. Those familiar with her media appearances recognized her posture. She was sizing up her questioner, preparing her deflection strategies. Crockett began methodically. "Ms. Conway, I'd like to establish a timeline of your involvement with the Strategic Communications Task Force. According to documents provided to this committee, you attended your first meeting on February 12th, is that correct?" Conway shifted slightly in her seat. "Congresswoman, I attended many meetings during my White House tenure. I can't be expected to remember specific dates from years ago without— The documents show your electronic signature on the attendance record, Crockett interjected, displaying the record on the hearing room screens. I'm simply asking you to confirm what the record already shows. Conway smiled tightly. As I was saying before you interrupted me, I attended numerous meetings, and while I don't dispute I may have been at that one, I certainly wasn't involved in the operational aspects of— Ms. Conway, Crockett cut in again, her tone measured but firm. This is a simple yes or no question about your attendance. The committee has limited time. Conway's eyes narrowed. I believe I was answering your question before you interrupted me, Congresswoman. If you'd allow me to finish my thoughts, I'll take that as a yes, since you're not disputing the record, Crockett said. Now, the task force minutes indicate you were assigned to liaise with external digital partners. Can you explain what that role entailed? Conway's first direct interruption came swift and sharp. That characterization is completely inaccurate. I was never assigned anything. I voluntarily offered strategic guidance as was appropriate for my position. And frankly, Congresswoman, I find your tone unnecessarily hostile. The committee room tensed. Conway had shifted from evasion to direct confrontation, a tactic she'd used effectively against journalists who lacked the power to compel answers. Crockett remained composed. Ms. Conway, I'm simply reading from the official minutes. If you'd like, I can have them displayed so everyone can see exactly what was recorded. Display whatever you want, Conway said dismissively, interrupting Crockett for the second time. Those minutes weren't taken by me, and they certainly don't reflect the limited nature of my advisory capacity. Crockett nodded to a staff member who displayed the minutes on the room's screens. The minutes read, and I quote, Conway assigned as primary White House liaison to External Digital Response Team, Authorization Level A, with direct reporting line to POTUS. That seems quite specific and operational. Wouldn't you agree? Conway's third interruption came before Crockett had finished her question. Those designations were purely administrative formalities. Having a title doesn't mean I actually directed day-to-day operations. I'm sure as a lawyer you understand the difference between nominal authority and actual involvement. The personal jab at Crockett's professional understanding was deliberate, a classic Conway tactic to knock questioners off balance. But Crockett didn't take the bait. Some observers in the room were exchanging knowing glances. They had seen this Conway performance before. She would interrupt, deflect, and eventually run out the clock on Crockett's allotted time without providing any substantive answers. Democratic members had tried and failed to counter this tactic in numerous previous hearings with high-profile witnesses. But Crockett appeared completely unperturbed. While other questioners had grown visibly frustrated with Conway's interruptions, Crockett seemed to have anticipated them, even welcomed them. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Conway's increasingly defensive tone. A former prosecutor seated in the audience whispered to his colleague, Crockett's letting Conway dig her own hole. Every interruption makes her look more evasive. His colleague nodded in agreement. Classic cross-examination strategy. Let the hostile witness reveal their desperation. Let's move to the series of emails sent from your official account on March 3rd, Crockett continued, displaying a new document. This email chain includes specific directives about message targeting for what you called persuadable demographics in contested areas. The email states that you had received approval for the expanded behavioral targeting protocol. Can you explain what that protocol involved? Conway's fourth interruption came with visible irritation. Those emails are being presented entirely out of context. This was standard campaign communication strategy, no different than what any political operation would discuss. There was absolutely nothing inappropriate about Ms. Conway, Crockett said firmly. I haven't suggested anything was inappropriate. I'm simply asking you to explain what the behavioral targeting protocol mentioned in your email actually was. Conway's fifth interruption came with a dismissive wave of her hand. Political campaigns have used data targeting for decades. This committee is attempting to criminalize standard political practices simply because they don't like the outcome. If Democratic campaigns use these exact same methods— Ms. Conway, Crockett cut in, her patience visibly thinning. I'm not asking about generic campaign practices. I'm asking specifically about the protocol referenced in your email that you personally said had received approval. The same protocol that former digital director Marcus Levinson testified was— and I quote, "designed to exploit fear responses through manipulated content targeting vulnerable demographics." The room grew even more tense. Conway's expression hardened as she launched her sixth interruption, her voice rising slightly. "Mr. Levinson's characterization is completely false and politically motivated. He was a disgruntled employee who had been reprimanded for performance issues. I find it shocking that this committee would rely on such a discredited source in what is clearly becoming a partisan witch hunt rather than a legitimate investigation." This time, Conway continued speaking over attempts by Crockett to respond, raising her voice and gesturing emphatically. "Furthermore, Congresswoman, I think your constituents would be better served if you focused on the actual problems facing this country rather than rehashing old political grievances in an obvious attempt at gotcha moments for your social media clips." The committee chairman tapped his gavel. "The witness will allow the Congresswoman to ask her questions without interruption." Conway sat back, the hint of a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She had successfully derailed the questioning and painted herself as the victim of partisan attacks, a tactic she had employed countless times on television. Journalists in the room were already scribbling notes about Conway's effective deflection strategy. One reporter whispered to another, "Classic Conway, she's running out the clock." Several Republican members nodded approvingly at Conway's handling of the questioning. Crockett paused, reviewing her notes with deliberate calm that contrasted sharply with Conway's emotional display. The hearing room fell completely silent as everyone waited for her response. Committee members leaned forward in their chairs, sensing something significant was about to happen. "Ms. Conway," Crockett began, her voice steady and controlled. "I'm not finished with my question." Conway immediately leaned toward her microphone. "I think we all know where this line of questioning is going. Congresswoman." Crockett looked directly at Conway and delivered her seventh response, the one that would soon go viral across every major news network and social media platform. "Ms. Conway," Crockett said, her voice clear and unhurried, "I have in front of me your sworn affidavit from October 2021, where you explicitly denied any involvement in directing social media targeting operations. Yet I also have in front of me an email sent from your personal account, not your official government account, to digital strategist Jason Winters dated March 7th. Crockett lifted a document that had not previously been displayed. Conway's expression flickered briefly with what appeared to be recognition, then concern. "This email was not included in the documents your attorneys provided to this committee. We received it yesterday from Mr. Winters's cloud archive after his testimony last week." Crockett paused, letting the implication sink in. "Would you like me to read it aloud, or would you prefer to explain why you wrote?" And I quote, "The behavioral targeting is working better than we anticipated. The emotional response metrics in the test counties are off the charts. Let's expand to the full list of vulnerable districts immediately. I've cleared it at the highest level." The chamber fell absolutely silent. Conway's usual rapid response failed her as she stared at the document Crockett was now displaying on the room's screens. An email with Conway's name clearly visible in the sender field, along with the damning text. The room collectively held its breath. Committee members from both parties stared at the screen in disbelief. The email contradicted not just Conway's testimony today, but statements she had made repeatedly in media appearances for the past 2 years. A senior Republican member removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes as if trying to process what he was seeing. "That appears to be my email," Conway finally said, her voice noticeably quieter. "Though without seeing the entire exchange, I can't speak to the context." "The context?" "Ms. Conway," Crockett continued with the same measured tone, "is provided by Mr. Winters' response, where he asks for clarification. Are we approved to use the emotionally manipulated content in all 37 targeted districts? Some of this material seems designed to incite rather than inform." To which you replied, and again, I'm quoting directly, "That's the point. Informed voters don't deliver the margins we need. Emotional voters do. Proceed with full deployment." A murmur ran through the hearing room. Conway's face had gone pale, the confident smirk replaced by a tight-lipped expression as she glanced toward her attorney. One journalist quietly closed his notebook. No notes were needed to remember this moment. Another began texting frantically, presumably alerting their newsroom to the bombshell testimony unfolding. A congressional staffer at the back of the room covered her mouth in shock. Conway's attorney appeared equally blindsided by the evidence. He frantically flipped through his notes, apparently searching for any prior mention of these emails during preparation sessions. His body language suggested this was the first time he was seeing this correspondence, raising questions about whether Conway had been fully forthcoming even with her own legal team. Ms. Conway, Crockett continued,
"This email directly contradicts your sworn testimony to this committee and the written affidavit you provided last year.
It also contradicts the statement you made under oath just 20 minutes ago when you described your role as purely advisory and not operational. Would you like to revise your previous testimony?" Conway leaned toward her attorney, who whispered urgently in her ear. The committee chairman allowed the brief consultation before Conway turned back to her microphone. "Congresswoman," Conway began, her voice regaining some of its earlier confidence, "a single email exchange without the full context of surrounding communications can easily be misinterpreted. The emotional response I referred to was simply standard A/B testing of campaign messaging, no different than what every political campaign does." Crockett nodded as if considering this explanation. "That would be a reasonable interpretation, Ms. Conway, if not for what happened in those 37 districts in the weeks following this email." She displayed a new set of documents on the screens. "These are internal analytics reports from the digital response team, again provided by Mr. Winters. They track engagement metrics for what they labeled Project Matchstick in exactly those 37 districts you authorized for full deployment. The reports specifically measure, and again I'm quoting, anger activation, fear response, and conspiracy engagement across targeted demographic groups. 2 Republican committee members were now reviewing papers handed to them by their staff, seemingly confirming the authenticity of the documents Crockett was displaying. Their expressions showed growing concern. This wasn't partisan theater, but something potentially much more serious. The room's atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What began as yet another partisan hearing with predictable battle lines had transformed into something far more consequential. Even committee members who had been checking their phones or whispering to aides were now fully engaged, watching the methodical dismantling of Conway's carefully constructed narrative. Conway's attorney placed a hand on her arm, but she shook it off, leaning forward. "Congresswoman, these are standard marketing terms being presented as something sinister. Engagement simply measures whether people read and respond to content. Perhaps this will clarify the nature of that engagement," Crockett replied, displaying another document. "This is an analysis from the digital team dated April 2nd. Celebrating that deployment of emotionally optimized content has resulted in 317% increase in threat language in target audience social media engagement." The report specifically notes that Conway's authorization of the enhanced emotional trigger package has exceeded expectation metrics in mobilizing high-intensity behavioral responses. The room fell silent again. Several committee members were frantically taking notes or whispering to aides. "Ms. Conway," Crockett continued, her voice remaining measured despite the gravity of the evidence, "would you still characterize these operations as standard campaign practices? Or would you agree that deliberately deploying content designed to trigger threat responses and track anger activation goes beyond conventional political messaging?" Conway's attorney whispered to her again, more urgently this time, but Conway waved him off. Her expression had hardened, the political professional visibly calculating her best path forward. "Congresswoman," Conway began, attempting to regain control of the narrative, "marketing professionals have always studied emotional responses to messaging. There's nothing nefarious about trying to create compelling content that resonates with voters." "I appreciate that perspective," Crockett responded, surprising some observers with her measured tone. "So let me ask directly, are you saying that deliberately designing content to maximize anger and fear responses in voters is, in your view, ethical campaign practice?" Conway recognized the trap. either condemn the practices documented in her own emails or publicly defend manipulating voters through fear and anger. She opted for deflection. What I'm saying, Congresswoman, is that your characterization of these standard marketing approaches as something sinister reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of modern political communication. Perhaps if Democrats were better at connecting emotionally with voters, you wouldn't be trying to criminalize effective Republican messaging strategies. Several Republican committee members nodded in apparent agreement, though others looked uncomfortable with Conway's admission that triggering fear and anger was simply effective messaging. Crockett waited for Conway to finish, then delivered the moment that would soon dominate news cycles across America. Ms. Conway, I understand your perspective on emotional messaging, but I'm not asking about general principles of political communication. I'm asking specifically about the email you sent on March 15th, again from your personal account to Mr. Winters, where you wrote, and I quote, "The fabricated ballot harvesting content is performing exceptionally well in District 7, 13 and 28. The anger metrics are through the roof. Let's produce similar content for the remaining priority districts, but make sure the evidence is untraceable to us." Crockett let the words hang in the air as the room erupted in murmurs. She displayed the email on screen, with Conway's name clearly visible in the sender field and the damning text highlighted. The word fabricated seemed to hover in the air. This wasn't about interpretation or spin anymore. It was an explicit acknowledgement of creating false information. A senior Republican committee member closed his folder and sat back, his expression grim. Several staffers were already on their phones, likely briefing their principals about the potential legal implications. A former federal prosecutor in the audience later described this moment to reporters as the perfect prosecutorial reveal. He explained, Crockett established a pattern of deception, gave Conway multiple opportunities to correct her testimony, and then presented the most damning evidence only after Conway had fully committed to her false narrative. It's exactly how you handle a hostile witness in a high-stakes trial. Ms. Conway, Crockett continued when the room quieted, this email explicitly acknowledges that your team was deliberately creating fabricated content about ballot harvesting, content you knew was false, and strategically deploying it to trigger anger responses in specific voting districts. This goes far beyond emotional marketing. This is deliberately spreading disinformation to undermine faith in our electoral system. Conway's face had gone completely white. She turned to her attorney, who was already writing a note. After a tense moment, Conway leaned into her microphone. On advice of counsel, I am invoking my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination for this, and any further questions. The hearing room erupted. The committee chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order as journalists rushed from the room to report the bombshell development. Conway, the communications professional who had never been at a loss for words, sat silently, her expression unreadable as her attorney whispered urgently in her ear. When order was finally restored, Crockett spoke one final time, her voice calm amid the chaos. Mr. Chairman, given the witness's invocation of the Fifth Amendment, in response to evidence that directly contradicts her sworn testimony to this committee, I move that we refer this matter to the Department of Justice for investigation of potential perjury and conspiracy charges. Conway stared straight ahead. The political operative who had built her career on never being left speechless, now sitting in stunned silence as the chairman agreed to Crockett's motion. In the span of 7 minutes, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had not only silenced one of Washington's most formidable communicators, but had potentially ended her public career and exposed a coordinated disinformation campaign that had targeted American voters. The video of their exchange would be viewed more than 40 million times within 24 hours. The aftermath of the Conway-Crockett confrontation reverberated through Washington like a political earthquake. Within hours, the 7-minute exchange had gone viral, with the hashtags Conway Exposed and Yow Crockett 7th Line trending nationwide. The moment immediately entered the pantheon of historic congressional hearing confrontations, alongside the Army McCarthy hearings and the Watergate investigations. Major networks scrambled to analyze the significance of the evidence Crockett had revealed. CNN's Anderson Cooper opened his show that evening with the stark assessment, Today, we witnessed one of the most consequential congressional exchanges in modern political history, one that may fundamentally reshape how we understand the social media disruption of our recent elections. Even on Fox News, where Conway had often found sympathetic interviewers, commentators struggled to defend her. "Whatever your political affiliation," said conservative commentator Jonah Goldberg, deliberately creating what Conway herself called fabricated content to trigger anger crosses a line that should concern anyone who cares about the health of our democracy, political. Strategists from both parties appeared on panel after panel, debating the ethics of emotional manipulation in campaign messaging. "There's a meaningful difference," noted Republican strategist Sarah Longwell, "between crafting emotional messages around factual information and deliberately fabricating content designed to trigger fear and anger." Conway's emails explicitly acknowledge crossing that line. The immediate fallout for Conway was swift and severe. 3 universities canceled her upcoming speaking engagements. A publisher indefinitely postponed her forthcoming book on political communication. Corporate clients of her consulting firm began quietly terminating their contracts, unwilling to be associated with someone now linked to orchestrating disinformation campaigns. Just 48 hours after the hearing, Conway released a statement announcing she was stepping back from public life to focus on family matters. Political analysts recognize this familiar Washington euphemism for a career in crisis. Her carefully cultivated image as a savvy but ethical political operative had been shattered by her own words. For Crockett, the aftermath transformed her from a respected but relatively junior congresswoman into a national figure. Her methodical dismantling of Conway's defenses, without resorting to grandstanding or partisan attacks, earned praise from across the political spectrum. Several major news outlets ran profiles on Crockett's background as a trial attorney, highlighting how her prosecutorial experience had prepared her for this moment. "There's a reason why former prosecutors often make the most effective congressional investigators," explained a veteran Capitol Hill reporter. "They understand how to build a case methodically and how to handle hostile witnesses who are trying to run out the clock." "What made Crockett's questioning so effective," explained former federal prosecutor Preet Bharara, "wasn't just the evidence she presented, but how she presented it. She gave Conway multiple opportunities to correct her testimony before revealing the contradictory evidence. That's not just good congressional oversight. That's textbook prosecutorial technique." Law schools began incorporating videos of the exchange into their trial advocacy courses. "Notice how Crockett never lost her composure despite repeated interruptions," Harvard Law professor Noah Feldman told his students. She understood that each interruption was actually revealing Conway's growing desperation. Beyond the personal consequences for Conway, the hearing had profound implications for ongoing investigations into election disinformation. 3 days after the exchange, the Justice Department announced the formation of a special task force to investigate coordinated efforts to undermine electoral integrity through deliberate disinformation. The psychological aspects of the techniques revealed in Conway's emails became a particular focus of public discussion. Dr. Robert Cialdini, author of Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion, explained in a widely shared Atlantic article, "What makes these techniques particularly troubling is their deliberate activation of the amygdala, the brain's fear center, to short-circuit rational evaluation of information. When voters are in a state of anger or fear, their critical thinking faculties are significantly impaired." Cybersecurity experts noted that the sophistication of the targeting operation revealed in Conway's emails suggested potential collaboration with foreign information warfare specialists. The precision targeting, emotional response metrics, and content optimization strategies mirror tactics we've seen from state-sponsored influence operations, explained a former NSA analyst in congressional testimony the following week. This revelation expanded the investigation's scope to examine potential foreign connections to domestic disinformation campaigns. Media organizations that had amplified the fabricated stories, identified in Conway's emails, faced intense scrutiny. Several issued retractions and implemented new verification protocols for politically charged content. Social media platforms accelerated the development of tools to identify and flag emotionally manipulative political content. Perhaps, most significantly, The exposed tactics changed how many Americans viewed political content designed to trigger emotional responses. Awareness of anger activation and fear response as deliberate political strategies made voters more skeptical of content that seemed designed to provoke outrage rather than inform. 1 week after the hearing, polls showed that 62% of Americans, including 47% of Republicans, supported investigations into campaigns that deliberately spread false information about election processes. Conway, once seen as a political genius for her ability to shape narrative, had inadvertently sparked a bipartisan backlash against the very tactics she had helped pioneer. For political operatives across Washington, the Conway-Crockett exchange served as a warning that the digital trails of disinformation campaigns could no longer be reliably hidden. The Conway precedent, as it became known in political circles, fundamentally altered the risk calculation for campaigns considering similar tactics. Congressional investigators reported a significant increase in cooperation from previously reluctant witnesses. "Nobody wants to be the next Kellyanne Conway," explained one committee staffer. "They've seen what happens when you stick to denials that can be disproven by digital evidence." 2 weeks after the hearing, additional fallout reached the tech industry. Investigations revealed that several social media platforms had provided special tools to political operatives that helped maximize emotional engagement through algorithmically optimized content. CEOs were called to testify before Congress about their role in facilitating what one senator called industrial-scale emotional manipulation. The revelations prompted renewed discussion about the responsibility of technology companies in political discourse. "These platforms aren't neutral conduits of information," explained tech ethicist Tristan Harris. "Their algorithms are specifically designed to amplify emotional content because it drives engagement." When political operatives intentionally create false content designed to trigger outrage, these algorithms become unwitting accomplices in spreading disinformation. Civil society groups and academic researchers began developing new frameworks for identifying coordinated, inauthentic behavior in political campaigns. The Conway Protocols, named after the exposed operation, became a standard reference for detecting emotionally manipulative content designed to trigger anger and fear. Media literacy educators incorporated these insights into their curriculum, teaching students to recognize when content seemed designed to provoke emotional rather than rational responses. Several states began drafting legislation requiring political campaigns to maintain records of all digital content they produced and distributed, with penalties for deliberate dissemination of provably false election information. Civil liberties groups raised concerns about potential First Amendment implications, while election security advocates argued that fabricating evidence to undermine electoral systems shouldn't qualify as protected speech. The most lasting impact, however, may have been on Congresswoman Crockett herself. Her methodical dismantling of one of Washington's most formidable operators catapulted her into conversations about future leadership roles. Senior Democrats began mentioning her as a potential future speaker or committee chair. Political analysts noted her unique combination of prosecutorial experience and communication skills made her particularly effective in an era of congressional investigations. What we witnessed wasn't just one congresswoman exposing one political operative, explained presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. It was a reminder of how powerful congressional oversight can be when done with precision and purpose. Crockett's questioning of Conway may well be remembered alongside the great congressional investigations of the past century. Crockett herself remained measured about her newfound prominence. In her first major interview after the hearing, she redirected attention from herself to the larger issues at stake. "This isn't about two individuals having a confrontation," she told 60 Minutes. "It's about whether we as a society are willing to accept deliberate manipulation and falsehood as standard practice in our politics." The tactics revealed in those emails represent an existential threat to informed democratic participation. The hearing also prompted soul-searching within both political parties about campaign tactics. Several prominent political consultants publicly pledged to reject clients seeking emotional manipulation strategies based on false information. Political science departments began revising their ethics curricula to address digital disinformation tactics more directly. 3 months after the hearing, The full impact of Crockett's questioning continued to unfold as investigations expanded to include other campaigns and digital operatives. What began as questioning of one witness had opened a window into systematic efforts to manipulate voter emotions through deliberately false content, efforts that crossed party lines and election cycles. For Conway, once celebrated for her political invincibility, the legacy of that 7-minute exchange would permanently define her career. For Crockett, it marked the emergence of a powerful new voice in American politics, one that cut through spin and deception. With clinical precision, the confrontation between these two women, one who had mastered the art of political deflection and one who had mastered the art of methodical exposure, would be studied for years to come as a pivotal moment when America began seriously reckoning with the dark side of digital political manipulation. But perhaps the most important question remains unanswered. How many other political operatives employed similar tactics that have yet to be exposed? And what other deliberately fabricated stories might still be shaping how Americans view their democracy? If you found this breakdown of how disinformation campaigns target voters enlightening, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell to stay updated on our ongoing coverage of how digital manipulation tactics on social media and our political system. Your engagement helps us continue to expose the truth and hold powerful figures accountable. The lasting impact of this congressional confrontation extends beyond these two individuals. Across the country, citizens who watched the exchange began questioning content designed to provoke strong emotional reactions, applying a new level of critical thinking to political messaging. Media literacy organizations reported record interest in their programs as people sought tools to identify manipulative content. The legal consequences continued to unfold over the following months. The Department of Justice investigation expanded to include multiple campaigns and consulting firms implicated in similar tactics. Several former digital operatives came forward as whistleblowers, detailing how the strategy of deliberately fabricating content to trigger emotional responses had become increasingly sophisticated and widespread. Perhaps most significantly, the exposure of these tactics created a rare moment of bipartisan agreement about the need for transparency in political messaging. As one Republican senator noted during subsequent hearings, whether you're liberal or conservative, we should all agree that deliberately fabricating information to manipulate voters undermines the very foundation of democratic decision-making. For students of political communication, the Conway-Crockett exchange became required viewing, a case study in both the dangers of digital manipulation and the power of methodical, evidence-based questioning to cut through layers of obfuscation and denial. As one political science professor explained to her class, in 7 minutes, Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated that accountability is still possible in our digital age, but only when investigators are willing to do the painstaking work of following electronic breadcrumbs. The exchange also highlighted the critical importance of digital evidence preservation. The emails that ultimately exposed Conway's operation might have been permanently deleted had Mr. Winters not maintained his own archive. This realization prompted new discussions about strengthening requirements for preserving political campaign communications. As for the two women at the center of this political drama, Conway eventually resurfaced with a dramatically lower public profile, focusing primarily on private consulting rather than media appearances. Crockett continued her methodical work on the committee, bringing the same prosecutorial precision to subsequent investigations. Her approach became a template for effective congressional oversight, one that prioritized evidence over theatrics and accountability over partisan point scoring. The question now facing American democracy is whether the exposure of these tactics will lead to meaningful reform or simply drive similar operations further underground. The battle between those who would manipulate voters through fabricated content and those committed to preserving informed democratic participation continues, but thanks to 7 minutes of congressional questioning, the public is now far more aware of what's at stake.